Today I was lucky enough to interview Edward Moore Kennedy Jr. He is an American lawyer and politician, and he currently represents Connecticut's 12th Senate District in the Connecticut Senate. He's a son of late Senator Edward M. Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts, and a nephew of President John F. Kennedy and Senator Robert F. Kennedy. This means he is cousins with Chris Kennedy, who happens to be running for governor in Illinois. It was a great conversation.
Mr. Kennedy, I really appreciate you taking the time today to sit down with me and so I can ask you a few questions. I guess I'll first start out by saying that a cornerstone of your family's public service mission has had a big focus on people with disabilities. Could you share with our listeners just how the Kennedy family's focus on people with disabilities got started in the beginning?
Well, first of all, Jay, thank you very much for having me on your program here, and I'm delighted to have an opportunity to speak to you, while I'm here in Chicago. You know, the mission of disability rights has been an important goal in the Kennedy family, and it's been now passed on from my grandparents to my father's generation and now on to my generation. We got involved in this issue much the same way as many families get involved. We had a family member who was born with an intellectual disability. And at the time, this was my Aunt Rosemary, my father's sister's Rosemary, there were very few, if no, educational opportunities for Rosemary growing up. And my grandparents searched and they spoke to other parents and they just couldn't find any resources, any people who had the expertise in educating somebody with Rosemary's particular challenges. And they started getting involved in really trying to organize other families that had children like Rosemary. And then my uncle, President John F. Kennedy, one of the first things he did when he was elected President of the United States is convene a national conference on intellectual disability and bringing all the people from around the country to come together to figure out how can we improve the lives of people with disabilities. And at the time, people were kind of surprised because here was the leader of the free world, the President of the United States, talking about his sister with an intellectual disability and really helping to, and the people thought, well, if the president has a sister with an intellectual disability, then it's okay for me to talk about these issues. And now I run an organization called the American Association of People with Disabilities. My cousin Tim Shriver has took the mantle from my Aunt Eunice, who was one of the creators of Special Olympics that began right here in the city of Chicago, as you know. And so now Timmy is continuing the work of the Shriver family in running the worldwide effort for people with disabilities. And my brother Patrick has been an outspoken advocate for people with mental health conditions as well.
So you are a senator, state senator in Connecticut, and you've served there for quite a while now. Are you enjoying it, would you say, right now?
Yes, I am. I'm in my third year, so I've been, I was elected and then re-elected a year ago, and now there's another election coming up in November, and so I'm enjoying my experience because it's an opportunity to really get involved and really help people on a very intimate level. I'm also finding that at the state level, you can really get a lot done. For example, I've authored and passed over 60 pieces of legislation in just 3 years. So I'm satisfied that I've been a very productive member of the Connecticut State Senate. So it's a lot of fun. Do you enjoy politics yourself?
Yeah, I think it's fun. I don't really probably think that I would want to be in politics, but I like being kind of an outsider and looking in at the news. Speaking of news, we're living in a world of so-called fake news. There's tweets being sent out that are unfiltered, messages from the president, and even at a local and state level. How do you think you can serve effectively and get your message out to the community that you serve, even with the chaos of modern day media?
Well, that's an awesome question, and that's an interesting question. You know, a current president has called the media the enemy of the people. Did you hear him
Yeah, I
say
did,
that?
yes.
And so, look, coming from a political family and being in politics myself, sometimes the press says things about me and says things about my family that I don't like or that I may disagree with, or I think is unfair the way that they cover certain events. But still, I think that they play an important role in our democracy in keeping people honest, in keeping people fair, in uncovering wrongdoing and corruption in our government. If it weren't for the press, that wouldn't happen, and politicians would have very little incentive to behave themselves and to follow the rules. So in today's world, the thing about the media and about the news is it's about controversy and criticism. So that's what the newspapers and the television news and media likes to focus on. We don't read a lot about good things that are happening or when people are collaborating. For example, in the Connecticut General Assembly, over 90% of all the bills we do in the Connecticut General Assembly happen with broad bipartisan support, right? But people think, for example, that, well, you guys are fighting all the time. Yes, it's true. On a few issues we do disagree and have a debate. But by and large, there's widespread agreement. So I think that the news sometimes they like and revel in controversy and criticism, and they don't focus enough on the good things that are happening. So I think that's one issue. But how you get your message out, I do. I'm on social media myself. I'm on Twitter and Facebook, and I'm trying to, compete to get my messages out when I'm working on a bill, for example, for mental health parity in Connecticut, or I chair the Environment Committee, so I'm doing a lot to try to preserve and protect our rivers and streams, for example. I have to compete for a lot of that time from a lot of the other controversy that's taking place.
I wanted to quickly touch down on kind of your family history. Obviously, the Kennedy has a great legacy all throughout American politics. Your eulogy to your father was probably, from my point of view, your best and most difficult speech. Could you tell our listeners about the lessons that you learned from him, especially the story about you walking up the hill with your disability, and how that was such an important time in your life?
Having to eulogize my father was probably the most difficult thing that I've ever done. Because how do you summarize somebody's life in 10 minutes? Right. It's really hard to do. So I figured that people would spend time talking about my father's gigantic legislative record of hundreds and hundreds of bills across 47 years in Congress. So I really wanted to talk about who he was as a man, who he was as a father, and the energy and inspiration and strength that he gave me at a difficult time in my life when I was diagnosed with cancer and lost my leg and really went through a dark period of having to go through chemotherapy. And it was a very demoralizing time in my life where I had very low self-esteem. I didn't think anybody would want to be my friend because of my disability. I didn't think any girl would ever want to go out on a date with me. And I thought, and my father really gave me the strength and the fortitude and the self-confidence that I needed at a really difficult time in my life.
Yeah, so your father also passed the Americans with Disabilities Act. Although it is a great piece of legislation, what do you think still needs to be done, especially now that you're a senator?
Okay, well, I think the Americans with Disabilities Act that was passed in 1990, so it's 27 years old, and we've made great improvements in trying to get rid of a lot of the architectural barriers. These are the curb cuts and elevators and bathroom stalls that you see that can now accommodate people with mobility impairments. So in some ways, that has been a big success. However, in other areas, such as in the area of employment, 2/3 of people with disabilities who are able and willing to work can't get a job. And it's not because they can't do the job. It's because employers have a lot of fears and stereotypes about what people with disabilities can and can't do. When I first started practicing law in New Haven, Connecticut, there was a lawyer there who was the most brilliant patent lawyer in Connecticut who was completely blind, totally blind. And he had a lot of clients, right? Because he worked with them on the phone. And after many clients actually met him, they didn't know that he had a visual impairment. And the first reaction was, well, how could this guy be a patent lawyer that he can't even read, right? But yes, he could with assistive technology and screen readers, and actually he has a very successful law practice. So I think a lot of the time people just feel like if they don't know somebody with a disability, they think that somebody will, of course they can't do that because of their disability. And so that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to raise awareness about what people can do. And at the American Association of People with Disabilities, whose board I now chair, we're working with companies all across the country because there are a lot of companies, including many right here in the city of Chicago, that are in the vanguard that say, you know, yes, we want to hire people with disabilities, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because they bring strength and enhance and make our company a better company because of it.
So earlier you were talking about how you have a family member with a disability. I too have a 11-year-old sister named Rosalie who happens to have been born with Down syndrome. She's taught me and my family, and just pretty much everyone, about seeing, empathy and the unlimited potential of everyone regardless of their disability. What has your physical challenge personally taught you?
Well, when I lost my leg to cancer when I was 12 years old, I thought it was the end of the world. I couldn't imagine living life with one leg. And I began to think of all the things that I wouldn't be able to do anymore, instead of thinking about all the things that I could continue to do. And so my initial reaction, it was, this is a terrible thing. Now, of course, I'm used to it, and I'm trying to help other people understand that this is a normal and expected part. Things happen in family. This is part of the human experience. This is who we are. And one of the things I'm trying to do today is address kind of the attitudinal barriers, the kind of the stereotypes, the fear that people have when they never have met anyone with a disability, of course. So that's one of the things that I'm really trying to do. Is at that time, I remember meeting a boy who was also getting treatment for cancer. He lost his leg to cancer just like me. And I would see him periodically when I would get my cancer treatment, and I noticed that he wasn't wearing an artificial leg. And I asked him, is it because it's, painful for you to wear? And he said, no, I would love an artificial leg. It's just that my parents can't afford one.
Right.
And I felt, all of a sudden, I thought, oh my gosh, how fortunate am I? I don't have that problem. And I said to myself at that time, when I grow up, I want to do something about that. I want to make sure that this type of thing doesn't happen to anybody. So that's one of the things that, that I learned. And I also learned in college, it took me a while to understand that it's not somebody's physical or mental condition that creates the handicap. A lot of the barriers that people face are the stereotypes and prejudices from other people. So what we're trying to do is really change society.
Yeah, so a big part of, obviously, education is school. And there's a lot of things about seeing unlimited potential that's not maybe included in your average textbook or anything like that. And as a young person who's not even in high school yet, I just wanted to ask you, there was a quote about the United States school system by a Spanish philosopher in the early 1900s, and he said, "A child educated only in school is an uneducated child." Do you think that is relevant to today's society, and it's still that same kind of principle implies?
Well, the greatest teachers that we have are our parents. Yes, it's important to go to school and we learn, but how we learn to live our lives is really taught by the example of our parents and our friends and those around us, the decisions that we make every single day. So I think it's a good thing that now kids with disabilities, up until 1975, I realize you're a lot younger than I am, but up until 1975, children with disabilities in the United States were not guaranteed a public school education in the United States. That was not a goal. People just didn't believe that people with disabilities deserved to be educated just like every other child in America. So once that happened, children with disabilities were able to assimilate and be mainstreamed and really become interactive with their able-bodied peers. And I think, if you grow up never meeting other people who are different than you, whether different race, different religion, or different ability than you, you're not going to be exposed to all these different ideas and points of view. And I think that's part of the idea.
Yeah, so now I just kind of want to transition over to your cousin Chris, who is running for governor now. In a letter that you sent out to his community supporting him, you say, quote, "He believes that people with disabilities deserve an equal chance at pursuing the American dream." Do you see individuals with disabilities today living out the American dream, and what progress do you think we need to make, and what can Chris do to kind of make that
Well, I think for one thing, people with disabilities do not want pity. They don't want a handout. They want an equal opportunity to participate. But in order to do that, we need an education and we need a job. And I think when I talk about that Chris wants to ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity to pursue the American dream, we know that in Illinois and in other states around the country, the zip code you're born in, the family that you're born in, the type of situation that you have can predetermine the type of life that you're going to lead. And Chris is all about fairness. He's all about equality. And that's why he believes that regardless of where you're from or your financial situation or your family background, every child in this state deserves an equal opportunity to pursue the American dream.
So speaking of equal opportunities, the Women's March is happening here in Chicago this weekend and all throughout other areas of the country. Are you a feminist, and do you think feminism is important right now?
Yes, I am a feminist. It's interesting because a lot of people think that men can't be feminists, but that's not true. I'm glad you asked that question. I believe, and I'm a parent of a young woman, of a daughter who I have really tried my hardest to raise to believe that there's nothing that she can't do. And there's no challenge, there's no job that she can't do just as well as anybody else. So I'm very lucky that I'm married to a very strong woman who is a lot smarter than I am and who teaches me every day that we all have a lot to offer. So I do plan, I'm looking forward to marching tomorrow morning.
Awesome.
In the Women's March, because I think that although it is a women's march, I think it's important that feminism and equality is not just a woman's issue, it's also a man's issue too, because we all benefit when people are treated equally in our society.
Right. So also, speaking of Chris, as I'm sure you know, he and his wife, Sheila, run Top Box Foods, which is a nonprofit organization that helps areas that are in the poor areas of Chicago and a little bit outside of that have access to affordable, healthy food. From my observation about the campaign, he kind of distances that and keeps it a little bit more quiet. That he's serving the community like this. Do you think this way of kind of doing it humbly has lived on in the Kennedys' legacy all the way back from when John Kennedy was president?
Well, Chris and Sheila have done an amazing job at Top Box Foods and ensuring that families in this region have access to low-cost quality food, because we all know in many parts of this city, they're food deserts. The only food that people can access is fast food and is not good, nutritious, affordable food. So, Chris does not like to toot his own horn. He doesn't like to talk about all the successes that he's made in this area because he's got a lot of humility. And humility is something that I pray for all the time, because I think we all need to be humble and work towards leading an honest, humble life. But now it's our job as friends of Chris to talk about that and to say, this is one of the many examples of the way Chris and Sheila quietly, but in a very powerful way, are slowly changing the lives of people in the greater Chicago region.
To conclude talking about Chris, what do you think, what would you say to undecided voters right now who are still deciding between Chris and the candidates running against him? How could you convince them that Chris is the candidate who should be the future governor of Illinois?
Well, this morning we had a breakfast where we had many of community leaders and business leaders from across the city of Chicago attend in the final 8 weeks of the campaign. And I talked about 3 qualities that I thought were the essential qualities of any good political leader that I think are Chris's strengths. One is that Chris is a good listener. Right. We need people who listen. Too many times politicians, all they do is talk all day long. They don't take the time to listen to what people are really telling them. I've seen that. I know that that's one of Chris's strengths. Secondly, Chris is a fighter. People need to know that somebody is going to wake up and fight for them every single day. Chris, he waited until his mid-50s to run for political office. If this were about him, if this were about his own political ambition, don't you think he would have run a lot earlier? He's doing this for all the right reasons. He's entering public life. And the third is that Chris is a collaborator. Right. And we need people who are going to be able to work together as a team, because the state of Illinois is not going to succeed unless everyone is working together. The business community, the people in public life, public service, the incredible academic institutions that are here in the state of Illinois. Everyone needs to work in concert with one another. And Chris has demonstrated that he has the ability to cross those barriers, to cross the aisle, and put together a winning team for the success of this state.
All right. Just to conclude this interview, I just want to ask, outside of your family members, who are your heroes and why?
Well, I meet people all the time. In my, I serve in the Connecticut General Assembly, and I meet people every single day who are quietly, but in a very powerful way, advocating for the environment, for better schools, for people with disabilities. And I'm inspired by people who I meet, every single day in the work that I do. They're not famous, they don't have a lot of notoriety, but those are the people who are my heroes. Obviously, I being a bone cancer survivor, my heroes are nurses. I mean, yes, the doctors are the brilliant, and the brilliant scientists who come up with the novel therapies, but the people who really deliver and make sure that people like me are able to succeed and support are the people on the front lines, you know. So I do have a soft spot for the nurses who help take care of me.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Kenny. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jay,
so
for
much.
having me on your program.
Yeah, thank you.